Megan mentioned, there are some things that you can look at displays when we're done here, and some items you can take if you'd like, posters and things that will remind you of Lake Tahoe. And also some awesome photographs, so don't forget to take your photos with them. It's kind of cool, I think, even though going to the lake is really nice, like you did yesterday. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I talk very fast, especially when I'm lecturing, and to my students. So the faster I talk, you may not be able to understand me. So slow me down if you don't understand something. Okay, let's go ahead and start. So some of this is going to be a little repetition from yesterday, but with some more details. And what I want to try to do is ask you and remind you of why the lake is so clear. So you learned this yesterday, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but you can tell me, why is the lake so blue, so clear? What did you learn from Jesse yesterday?
A lot of measures have been put in place to prevent the settlement of particles and nutrients in the lake.
I love it, but even before humans, forget humans, the lake was clear before we were here. Why is it so clear even before that, just naturally? Go back even further.
I think because it is quite deep and very large.
Okay, the lake itself is quite deep and large. That's one part of the component.
That's precise.
But it has only one.
The watershed. What is it? The watershed is what? Large or small? Small. So the key part is we have a watershed that's small, meaning less opportunity for things to run out of the watershed, and a big lake that can accept it. Small watershed to large lake volume results in less stuff coming down the watershed and a beautiful blue lake. Very simple. Even before the humans came, this place was so beautiful. The watershed is also mostly made of geology of granite. Not all of it, but most of it. And granite geology, for those of you who like geology, is low nutrients. So even when it rains, there's generally not as much sediment and nutrient coming from the geology. So this is what keeps Tahoe blue originally.
I'm the only non-sciencey kind of person here. What's a watershed?
We talked about this yesterday. What is a watershed, guys?
Area of land around the
Area of land around the point that's the shallowest in an area. That simple sort of framework.
That's good, because I thought it was what comes down from the highest parts of the mountain.
It does, literally. Anything that surrounds that, but that goes to the lowest point. And the lowest point here is the lake. All right, the other reason this lake is clear is the biggest part of the watershed is in the south end of the basin. We are in the south end today. We are living, last night you lived in South Lake Tahoe. The south end of the basin is the biggest part of the watershed or basin. And originally when the water came down, it went through a giant wetland. And what do wetlands do for protecting lakes and rivers? You know what a wetland is?
Yeah.
It's an area that has, not like a lake, but has more plants and is shallow. What does a wetland ecosystem do for protecting the lake?
It filters the water, keep the sediment.
Exactly, it filters the water. Water slows down, the plants use it. So originally, before 1950, we had North America's largest mountain wetland was here in Tahoe. And that water gets filtered as it comes down to the lake. So it protects the lake to keep it blue. And that's what gives the original remarkable blue color. I'll tell you in a moment that that wetland is not there anymore, and we will actually see it today when we go visit what the new housing developments in the wetland. So that's just a reason why the lake is blue without humans in it, just its natural setting. When I try to teach classes, I always try to remember humans are important, but we're not that important. Nature is equally important. There's lots of things happening of what makes things unique, and that's what makes Tahoe blue. Now I'm going to tell you in about 40 minutes, if I can, a history of time of 180 years of change here in Lake Tahoe and what that has done to the ecosystem. You learned about this yesterday, but with less detail. In the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, Tahoe underwent its first major change. Huge change here. You were here yesterday, guys, in Glenbrook. You were literally here in Glenbrook with Susan and Gary's house. And you walked on this pier. Pretty cool. But look at the watershed. There's no trees. Barely any. In the 1800s, around 1850, almost the entire watershed was removed of its trees. The trees were taken and moved over the mountain into Nevada, to make mining areas, infrastructure for mining, silver and gold. And this was called the Comstock mines. And then we also developed roads and we have species introduced. We'll talk about those in a minute. So this is the Clemens home, and today you can see it looks more forested. The forest today is different species than the forest of 150, 180 years ago. Very different species. That's the first major change. 1920s to the 1960s is when U.S. economy was booming. And this is when the U.S. economy was driving global economy at that time, remember. Yes, there was other colonial powers really driving engines, but remember the 1920s were this industrial age that was really driven from North America and Europe, parts of Europe. Crazy to think about, but it had its major impact at Tahoe then, because as soon as you had this big boom of the middle class, people wanted to go to do tourism and recreation and living away from the city, living away from San Francisco, away from Sacramento, which is just 200 miles away, big cities or less. And so we saw a lot of road development. We saw more visits by cars, more visits by train for people. You can see this is an early 1920s photograph of the ladies going into little cabins in Glenbrook where you just were yesterday, changing to go swimming in the lake, like some of you did. Crazy people. We also had, that was the 1920s and 30s, we also had really rapid development because people started seeing more tourist economy, more recreation, we call it living, relaxation. The Upper Truckee Marsh, that wetland I just told you about, the big wetland in the south, was developed by developers, and it's called the Tahoe Keys development. We're going to go visit this development because I want you to see that change from 50, 60 years ago, 80 years ago now, has a big change to the whole lake. And we're never removing those houses now, but that development was unregulated. South Shore, where you're living now, 1957, was pretty empty, but it was starting to be developed. Bigger buildings, more erosion, more nutrients coming from the watershed. So we'll visit this place, the Tahoe Keys, the converted wetland, in about 2 hours. This is what that development looks like. These are the advertisements. Live on an island in the sky. So these were advertisements to wealthy people in different cities around the region and around the United States. Come live in Tahoe. Build its tourism. For some of you, we had conversations yesterday about resource extraction and removal. You know, these are big changes that happen. You have to take them with very good care. Because you can come live and make lots of money, but you permanently change the environment and ecosystem. And this is exactly what these early features were like by developing new houses. This is a rendition. Look at this cute little boat, plastic boat, little car from the old days. Just a model of development. So here's what it starts looking like today. A lot more, the wetland is gone, a lot more houses here that we'll see later. And you can see the filtration that you might see in the south end of the lake changes. There's more sediment at the south end, more sediment. Remember, what was the size of particle that changes the clarity? Is it the big particles or the small ones? The smallest ones, because of what physical principle? Density. Yeah, you guys, look at that. I love it. Smart from yesterday. Good memory. So basically, this is South Shore where we are living today in the early 60s. This is called the age of building. We built a lot of stuff up after World War II. Our middle class got more wealthy. We said, let's come recreate and party. And one other site that was proposed for development where we're going to go in the afternoon for a lunch is Emerald Bay. They were proposing a bridge to go across Emerald Bay. This was very controversial. Rather than putting a road around the bay, let's just put a bridge through. Let's build everything with roads and infrastructure. You can feel that changes the mindset of nature. You put things in that change how nature looks. That did not occur.